The most shocking thing about the Friday the 13th series is that the story begins in 1958. That's 60 years ago, only 13 years after World War II, for crying out loud. In this flashback, 2 camp counselors are murdered by an unseen assailant. And there we have it, the template for some 10 movies, totaling about 15.5 hours of viewing. I don't think I've ever seen a movie before whose opening credits don't list a single actor. See? They go right from the title to the director of photography. Man, who were their agents? Now it's the present, Friday the 13th, 1980, where a small group of teenagers are arriving at a summer camp where they've been hired as counselors. Not all the town folk are keen on the camp reopening, as they think it's cursed or some shit.
Camp Blood, they're opening that place again?
I have to say, despite being so low budget, I find the movie visually interesting. There's so many details to look at, from the street, to the clothing, to the cigarette cartons under the counter. I mean, they probably shot this quick and cheap in a real restaurant, where all this stuff just happened to be. But if someone were making a movie today, set in 1980, and wanted to replicate the shop, it would take tons of money and effort. I'm reminded of an interview I once saw with Francis Ford Coppola, who said he liked shooting in the rain or snow, because the weather was essentially special effects for free. The passage of time does the same thing here. All this common junk no one in the audience paid attention to back in 1980 has now been turned into the set dressing equivalent of Coppola's special effects for free. The waitress volunteers some trucker to drive this one girl out to Camp Blood. Guy's probably thinking, "Geez, Alice, I just sat down to eat and now you're making me chauffeur some twit around?"
Name's Annie.
All right, let's go.
At least he seems to get back at her by stiffing her on the tab, which is his right. I mean, she can't expect him to pay for a meal she only let him eat half of. I guess he got sick of the girl's yapping, because the next time we see her, she's abandoned on the side of the road hitchhiking. Some driver picks her up and murders her out in the woods. One of the counselors is a practical joker. We see him prancing around in an Indian outfit. We see him shooting an arrow at some girl, who seems to find him almost killing her charming. At one point, he pretends to be drowning. The guy coming to his rescue is played by Kevin Bacon, who during a 2013 interview on The Howard Stern Show describes a YouTube video highlighting his lack of athleticism.
There's a funny thing that somebody showed me on YouTube, which is called Kevin Bacon Can't Run or Dive for Shit. And it's this shot of me in that bathing suit running down the dock.
Right.
And I can't run. It's true. I look like a complete asshole. And then I dive, and my dive is so fucking bad. I mean, it's hilarious.
There's a part where a snake gets into the cabin, and I'm pretty sure the filmmakers killed it for real. What, Tom Savini was too busy combing his mustache he couldn't be bothered to make a fake snake body? Yeah, I guess it was only a snake. Who cares, right? I mean, the Twilight Zone movie was chopping the heads off 6- and 7-year-old children. Snake doesn't really compare. So champion diver Kevin Bacon and his girlfriend go into one of the cabins to have sex, somehow totally missing the dead body lying on the bunk above them. Kevin Bacon's death is arguably the movie's most gruesome. He gets an arrow through the neck, with blood spurting so long you'd almost think it was a Peter North video. It bugs me the movie doesn't even know how to foreshadow the killings properly. Like, remember at the beginning, when Ass Clown shoots an arrow at one of the girls, and it just barely misses her?
Are you crazy?
Near the end of the movie, she returns to the archery range, so you just know she's gonna get struck by an arrow for real this time. Only she doesn't. The scene cuts away, and her death occurs off-screen. When her body does show up, it looks like she's been whacked with the bloody axe someone left in her bunk. So what was the point of drawing her back to the archery range if she wasn't going to get shot? It seems so obvious. You can even see Tom Savini scribbled the same note down in his copy of the script. Okay, fine. If they didn't want to shoot an arrow at her, then how about the practical joker? Wouldn't it have been a kind of poetic justice if after so irresponsibly shooting his bow at someone, he himself was then killed by an arrow? We do see one of the counselors nailed to the door by a volley of arrows, but it's some other guy we never saw anywhere near the archery range. The whole thing seems like a missed opportunity. Watching the movie, I'm surprised at how many of the deaths occur off camera. Like when the camp owner returns and gets stabbed by someone hiding in the dark, the movie kinda cheats, as they don't have the actress playing the killer behind the sign. This may be hard to see on YouTube, but when you pause this part, you can see the person standing there is a man with a mustache and glasses. In fact, I'm about 99% sure it's the camp owner playing both roles in this scene. As everyone knows, the killer turns out to be a Mrs. Voorhees, whose son Jason drowned at the camp back in the 50s, and now she's murdering teenagers who weren't even born yet for revenge. The final girl chops her head off, and that leads us to the most surreal, frightening image in the entire series. In fact, I'd say it's one of the defining images in all of 1980s horror films. After lulling the audience with peaceful music, young Jason, covered in algae and rotted flesh, leaps from the lake and drags our final girl down. I can only imagine the audience reaction when this movie originally came out. They must have been falling out of their seats screaming. The movie should have ended right there. What a dynamic closing shot. But then they blow it by having her wake up in the hospital, her vision of the boy in the lake being just a dream. Hairstyles by 6 Feet Under. That has to be the worst company name for a business that isn't a funeral home. Friday the 13th was a huge hit. The popularity of the film, and other low-budget slasher flicks, prompted Siskel and Ebert to devote an entire show to the genre, which today comes off as reactionary and even a little dishonest. Listen to them misrepresent the werewolf movie The Howling in order to pad their list of violence against women films.
We're not talking about just a couple of films. It seems like we're getting new ones of these kind of films every other week. That amounts to a major movie trend. Here are some examples. The Howling, a new movie about a woman who goes alone on a vacation and is tortured by the locals.
Yeah, that's a real accurate description of The Howling. It's like saying Star Wars is a movie about a terrorist group that kills thousands when they blow up a government building.
You never saw the driver in that last scene. Instead, you saw everything through the driver's eyes. Now, in the traditional horror movie, we often saw things from the victim's point of view, but that's no longer. Now we look through the killer's eyes. It's almost as if the audience is being asked to identify with the attackers in these movies, and that really bothers me.
I'm pretty sure that sequence was shot as a POV of the killer in order to hide it's a woman, not make the audience identify with her. I also think Gene goes way overboard with his psychoanalysis of what drove the film's popularity.
I'm convinced it has something to do with the growth of the women's movement in America in the last decade. I think that these films are some sort of primordial response by some very sick people of men saying, "Get back in your place, women."
Was there a misogynistic streak fueling the popularity of Friday the 13th, even though the men seemed to be getting killed in numbers equal to the women? I think the appeal of Friday the 13th is right there in the Kevin Bacon scene. Back then, movies were not that graphic. The audience enjoyed seeing something shocking and disgusting, so they could cry out and laugh in unison. It's the same reason people like the Jackass movies, or the Borat wrestling scene, or whatever crazy 2-girl, 1-cup video that's floating around the internet. It's all about the exhilaration of, oh my god, I can't believe I just saw that! Interestingly, at the box office, Friday the 13th grossed more in its opening week than The Empire Strikes Back grossed in theirs. Although by the end of the year, Friday the 13th had grossed $39 million, and The Empire Strikes Back had grossed over $200 million. So I guess that settles that. Friday the 13th Part 2 came out less than a year later. It starts off with a 5-minute flashback, recapping the end of the first film. You know, for a movie that's only 86 minutes long, that's not an insignificant percentage of running time.
You want something to eat?
We meet the girl who survived the first film. She's all jumpy and nervous about someone coming into her apartment and killing her, which is why she has no issues about leaving the window hanging wide open. Hey, she lives on the first floor. Who could possibly climb up there? We see a bunch of terrible self-portraits she's done, probably as some kind of art therapy. She opens the fridge to grab a brewski and discovers a severed head before being stabbed in the brain with a screwdriver. It was nice of Jason to lift the kettle off the stove after killing her. I mean, he wouldn't want to start a fire, right? Apparently, the head in the fridge is Mrs. Voorhees. I guess the hairstyles match? but it looks totally different from the Mrs. Voorhees head we see at the end of the movie.
I don't want to scare anyone, but I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason. 5 years. 5 long years he's been dormant.
Wait, this movie takes place 5 years after Part 1? That's a heck of a time leap. I guess that explains why Mrs. Voorhees' head looks so different between the beginning and the end. It's had half of a decade to rot. Since the first movie took place on Friday, June 13th, 1980,
5 years.
The math would suggest this movie takes place in 1985. Only, there was no Friday the 13th in any of the summer months that year. Friday the 13th didn't fall in June until 1986. Okay, so I guess it's 1986 now. The movie plays out pretty much the same as the previous. Hey, they know what the audience wants. Bunch of people getting killed one by one. Now, these kids aren't camping at the original Camp Blood, where the murders happened, but at a different camp a little down the way. Can't be too far, because when a couple of them hike over to take a look, they find the mangled body of this girl's dog. Oddly, she seems really laissez-faire about the disappearance of her dog.
Muffin?
Terry, lunch!
Okay, I'm coming.
He isn't Benji. If he wandered off into the woods, he'll probably be eaten by predators, yet she seems mildly annoyed rather than concerned. Like later that evening, after partying with her friends, she's suddenly, "Oh right, that dog," and starts calling for Muffin.
Muffin?
Well, I don't see the dog. Might as well go skinny dipping. I swear, if this girl had a baby, she'd probably wind up leaving it locked in the car. So Jason gets to work slaughtering everyone. The person I feel worse for is Buddy with the wheelchair. Just as he's about to get laid, he gets a cleaver across the face, then rolls backwards down this giant staircase that came out of nowhere, like he's in a Benny Hill skit. A bunch of the counselors are hanging out at a local bar, still yammering away about Jason.
Oh, what if there is some kind of boy or beast running around Camp Crystal Lake? I mean, let's try to think beyond the legend, put it in real terms. I mean, what would it be like today? Some kind of out-of-control psychopath? A frightened retard?
Listen, language evolves. I'm pretty sure frightened retard was the accepted medical term back then. Sort of like how a diagnosis of cancer was referred to in most medical journals as, "Oh, dude, you're toast." Although everyone decides to go back to camp so they can get killed, the nerd guy decides to stick around and suck back a few more. Sort of reminds me of how Family Guy creator Seth MacFarlane was supposed to be on American Airlines Flight 11, the first plane to crash into the World Trade Center on September 11th.
Come fly with me, let's fly away.
But because he'd been so drunk the night before, he didn't make it to the airport on time, and they wouldn't let him on the plane. See, young man? Being an alcoholic can save your life.
Let's fly.
The ending sequence of Part 2, featuring a long chase between Jason and the final girl, is the most effective in the series. It's genuinely tense and suspenseful, and like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, replicates the feeling of exhaustion generated by a real nightmare. Of course, they end up blowing the mood by having Jason fall off a chair like a klutz. I'm surprised they didn't edit in a slide whistle sound effect. The girl gets a chainsaw. Aha, the tables have turned. She's the boss now. Jason's cowering as she has the superior weapon. But as soon as the movie cuts away for a second, her chainsaw turns into a chair. The fuck? By putting on her old sweater, the girl is able to confuse Jason, making him think she's his mother. This strategy is so effective, the girl from Psycho 2 uses it to impersonate Norman Bates' mother when she needs him to calm down. Finally, Jason is defeated, and everything looks like it's going to be okay. Except for the piles of corpses, of course. Even the friggin' dog comes back. Of course, the movie has to have one last shocker. I originally saw Friday the 13th Part 2 at a midnight screening back in 1997. At the part where Jason comes through the window, my friend sitting beside me literally jumped out of his seat and emitted the most high-pitched, girly shriek I've ever heard in my life. The other 6 people in the theater were laughing their asses off. It is one of my favorite movie-going memories. After Jason jumps through the window, we flash to white, and suddenly she's being taken away in an ambulance with her boyfriend. Why didn't Jason kill them? Am I supposed to think the whole Jason jumping through the window was a dream? Just like how Jason jumping out from the lake in the original was a dream?
10 milligrams Valium.
Friday the 13th Part 3 picks up right where Part 2 left off, which means it's the first movie in the series that doesn't take place on a Friday the 13th. I mean, it's the next morning. The TV news is showing Blondie being taken away in the ambulance, so it's now Saturday the 14th. The first scene deals with an unhappy couple running some kind of general store.
Didn't I feed you enough for supper? The doctor said you have to lose weight now, didn't he?
Good for him eating that donut. I mean, you know he's about to get killed, so carpe diem. There's disgusting sound effects for the shitting scene. You know, I can deal with movies showing people sitting on the toilet, but do we have to have disgusting, diarrhea plopping sounds? And good lord, he didn't even wipe his ass. Jason kills the 2 of them, and then it's the next day, Sunday, June 15th, 1986, and a whole new group of kids are heading out to the lake for a camping trip. At least, I'd assume it's the next day. I guess it could be a week or even a month later. I just know the date isn't Friday the 13th anymore.
The terror of Jaws will not stop at the edge of the screen. The all-new Jaws 3D. The third dimension is terror.
In the mid-'80s, there was a resurgence of 3D movies, and pretty much any third sequel was done in 3D. You had Jaws 3D, Amityville 3D, and of course,
Friday the 13th Part 3 in Super 3D.
Which is why when you watch it, there are countless shots of things pointing right into the camera. The 3D aspect made this the lone Friday the 13th movie Gene Siskel had anything positive to say about. He wrote, "The opening credits were particularly impressive, with the actor's name seemingly zooming out from the screen." He also lovingly singles out the low-angle shot of someone working a yo-yo up and down into the camera lens, and in effect, into our amazed faces. Really? The yo-yo had him amazed? What, was he some kind of a simpleton? Because no one thought to pack any supplies into that big van they drove up, the nerdy guy and one of the hot girls go into town to buy food, only to meet a hostile reaction.
We don't accept no food stamps.
Why does the cashier make that snide no food stamps crack? Is the girl Hispanic or something? Is it supposed to be a racist remark?
Shelly, I need some money.
Why did she go up to the counter if she didn't have any money? I guess she really was planning on paying with food stamps. And then the hippie gets up from the toilet without wiping his ass. Man, nobody wipes their ass in this movie. That cabin must stink. Friday the 13th Part 3 is most famous for being the sequel in which Jason gets his iconic hockey mask, which originally belonged to the nerdy guy, Shelly. He's another one of those practical Joker characters, who kept playing pranks and pissing everyone off, so that when he finally does get his throat cut open, the girl thinks he's just being an asshole again. I guess you could say Shelly died of the boy who cried wolf syndrome. The actor playing Shelly went on to become a lawyer. He appeared on the Bob Saget game show 1 vs. 100, where he beat Jeopardy super champion Ken Jennings in order to win the grand prize.
And this, Larry, you are the last man standing. You just won $250,000.
Yeah, that's what we like to see. Lawyers winning a ton of money. Jason looks remarkably different in Part 3 than he did in Part 2. One explanation could be, we only saw Jason's face in Part 2 when he jumped through the window, and that seemed to have been a dream, so it was only what the girl imagined Jason looked like, not what he really does. For the third movie in a row now, we end on a shock dream sequence. This one ripping off the first movie, having Mrs. Voorhees come jumping out of the lake instead of Jason. Once again, the next movie begins where the previous one ended. Jason's body is lying in the barn, right where they left him. Jason appears to be dead, so they load him into an ambulance and take him to the morgue, where they do that tired old cliche of the morgue attendant eating at the same time he's working with the bodies.
Man responsible for the murders in Wessex County this past week is at this moment in the Wessex County Medical Center morgue.
Yeah!
Thank you, officer.
Why is the nurse so excited to hear the name of the hospital mentioned on the news? Wouldn't it be mentioned on the news all the time? Like whenever there's a traffic accident or whatever? The injured were taken to the Wessex County Medical Center.
Yeah!
Thank you, officer.
The morgue guy and the nurse are about to get it on, but Jason drops his arm and cock-blocks the guy.
I must be nuts!
Luckily for him, he's got the aerobics channel to watch. I'm not sure if this aerobics show was shot specially for the movie, or if this is a real clip. Because back in the 80s, those shows were seriously that dirty. You could totally pull your pud to them. So Corey Feldman plays a young Tom Savini, who makes all kinds of monster masks. He's vacationing with his mom and sister at a cabin in the woods. I'm guessing his mom is a chronic alcoholic or something, because his sister is the one looking after him for the entire movie, while mom's off by herself doing God knows what. The sister has probably been forced to fill this role ever since Tommy was born. A group of kids are vacationing at the cabin next door. There's a part where mom looks out the window forlornly, bummed out she's no longer young and carefree, and the hot teenage studs no longer pay her any attention. Obviously, she drinks to forget. The teenagers go skinny dipping, and unless I missed something, this is the first time the series has had any male nudity. Crispin Glover's the only one who doesn't show his ass, though. Maybe he had a premonition he was going to be Marty McFly's dad next year, and didn't want to do anything potentially embarrassing in this movie? Never mind. He winds up banging some girl, then immediately brings her underwear to his numbskull friend, so the two of them can sniff it together and savor its bouquet. While everyone's getting killed, he's sitting in the living room watching old stag films and laughing like an idiot. You might think it's unrealistic, him not hearing anything going on in the house, but trust me, those projectors were loud. I totally buy him not hearing any of this noise. I can't tell if Jason threw the dog out the window, or if the dog just went, "See ya," and jumped out itself to get away. Finally, it's just down to Corey Feldman and his second mom. Because he's such a makeup expert, he shaves his head in order to save the day.
Jason!
Is that supposed to make him look like Jason? When he was a kid, I guess? So far, Jason seems pretty easy to dupe. Seems all you have to do is pretend to be his mother, or him, and he stands there like a dope, looking mesmerized. Yet again, the movie ends in a hospital. Corey Feldman and his sister mom are safe. But wait a minute. Oh my god. He opened his eyes, and scary music started playing. So I guess that means we're all supposed to think he's become evil? Perhaps even like Jason? When Friday the 13th Part 4 came out, the local drive-in had a marathon, showing Parts 1, 2, and 4. I wonder why they skipped Part 3. Weren't people confused?
Our next movie is Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, an immoral and reprehensible piece of trash.
Siskel and Ebert used their show to condemn the series yet again. Ebert gets way melodramatic.
Just think of the message this film offers to its teenage audience. The world is a totally evil place, this movie says. It'll kill you. It doesn't matter what your dreams and hopes and ambitions are. It doesn't matter if you have a new boyfriend or a new girlfriend or you've got plans for the future. You can forget those plans because you're going to wind up dead. I think the people who made this movie ought to be ashamed of themselves, and that's...
I have to admit, I was impressed by Gene Siskel becoming the voice of reason, calming down Ebert's hysterics.
But I don't think anyone's going to take this as a worldview picture. I really don't. What they're trying to give kids is a roller coaster ride, and instead of the thing of falling off the roller coaster, it's will you get stabbed in some way?
Will you get disemboweled and eviscerated?
It's a terrible film. I'm just holding you back a little bit from what sounds a little bit soapboxy in terms of kids are going to take this as this is the way the world is. I don't think they'll do that.
Friday the 13th Part 5 has the distinction of being briefly banned by the Ontario Censorship Board. The film could only be screened after Paramount agreed to cut out violent shots. I wonder, did Paramount have to strike new last-minute prints just for Ontario? Or did someone have to manually edit the offending material out of existing film prints? Remember, these weren't digital files you could easily replicate. Once a film was locked, it was impossible to make any changes without creating a huge amount of headache-inducing work. The movie starts off with Corey Feldman returning. I believe he was filming Stand By Me at the time, and needed a note to leave filming for a day to do this scene. Turns out that's a body double walking. Corey only shot these close-ups of his face. Now we see Corey Feldman's character much older, as he's arriving at some kind of halfway house for nutcases. The ordeal with Jason must have cracked him up. So when does this movie take place? If Tommy was 12 in Part 4, which according to the math was sometime around 1986, and the older Tommy is 17 or so, that means it's now the early 90s, despite the fact the movie came out in 1985, and they've clearly forgotten how far in the future this should logically be. So Tommy's at this new wilderness rest home with a bunch of other characters, like Headphone Girl and Fat Guy. Fat Guy has to be one of the most insulting portrayals of an obese person. I mean, he's got chocolate dribbling down the sides of his mouth, like blood from Count Dracula's.
You know something? I really love it here. I hate it.
One of the patients gets a little hot under the collar and axes the fat guy. It was nice of whoever put his severed arm on his back, so the paramedics could scoop them all up in one trip.
Bunch of pussies.
So the paramedic guy. Yeah, this is the Friday the 13th sequel that doesn't have Jason in it. At the end of the movie, we discover the killer was the paramedic, which is why the filmmakers include about 1 million close-ups of him with his eyes bugging out. Back in 1985, I'm pretty sure most of the audience figured out the twist.
You talking to me, Sheriff?
According to the sheriff, the paramedic was the father of the fat kid. I guess seeing the mess they made of his boy drove him over the edge. Inspired by newspaper clippings about the Camp Blood murders, he decides to dress up as Jason in order to take his revenge. Wait, there was a picture of Jason on the front page of the newspaper? Who the hell took that? And when? The killing spree of fake Jason doesn't make much sense. Certainly not from a revenge angle. The guy who actually murdered Fat Kid got taken away by the police. Now, maybe the paramedic decided the other kids in the group home shared the blame? But he was also killing people who had no connection to the group home or his son whatsoever. Like these two guys, who were either 1950s greasers, or a couple on their way to one of those leather bars from cruising. The next to die is the guy from the mental hospital Tommy Jarvis was in before being sent to the group home. Why is this guy even on fake Jason's radar? He's got a hot date with some waitress? A good way to get a cheap scare in one of these movies is to have a cat leap out of nowhere. I love how in this one you can see they just clearly threw the cat at her. Maybe it was take 17 and they were pissed the cat wasn't doing it right. When fake Jason kills the couple in the woods, he does so by cutting and gouging their eyes out. Later on, we see the cook was killed by having his eyes ripped out. Was that supposed to be symbolic of something? Like how they witnessed his son's death, so this is punishment for seeing evil? Maybe, but there's nothing ritualistic about any of the other murders. The cook's son goes out to visit his brother, who's played by Spider from the masterpiece Return of the Living Dead. The part with him and his girl has to be the worst dating scene ever put on film. First, after having dinner in a junky old van, the amorous mood is interrupted when...
Some damn enchiladas!
While he's in a tin outhouse, she begins shaking the walls, because I guess that's supposed to be cute. While he's still shitting, they begin to serenade one another. The filmmakers must have wanted them to sing, "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?" But then the producers realized they'd have to pay for the rights to use the words, so instead they just sing, "Ooh Baby," over and over to the same tune.
Ooh baby, ooh baby, ooh baby, ooh
The evening takes an angry turn when the shaking resumes.
I told you this isn't funny. Now you're gonna get it, bitch.
Here's another one who doesn't wipe his ass. I know he's eager to get out there and smack her around, but that had to be a real sloppy, messy dump that required major cleanup. I mean, if he isn't gonna bother to wipe after that, he might as well have just shit in his pants. The headphone girl gets killed because she can't hear fake Jason over the sound of her music. Well, at least she died doing what she loved, not sitting on the toilet. Wow, she's much better at using the chainsaw against Jason than the girl in part 2 was. Oh wait, no she isn't. Yeah, just throw it at him. That'll work. Finally, fake Jason lands on some spikes, revealing to the survivors it was just the paramedic, who also happened to be an amazing makeup artist to give himself such an elaborate disguise. At the end of the movie, Tommy has the Jason mask in his hospital room. I guess he stole it off the body and stuffed it down his pants before the police came? Or maybe they let him keep such a vital piece of evidence as a souvenir. Traumatized by the experience, he dons the mask and somehow produces a huge kitchen knife out of nowhere. I suppose this ending can be interpreted in two ways. Either it means Tommy has now become Jason, or perhaps it's meant to suggest that he was homicidal all along, and it was him killing the unrelated people, like the greasers and the waitress. Interesting theory, but I don't think so. When the greaser kid gets killed, you can clearly see that's the paramedic's hand holding the flare. Alright, fine. Fuck it then.
Gee, it's really amazing how that hockey mask has stood up under the wear and tear of the last 4 pictures, you know. Only a few scars. It's been burned, it's been sliced, it's been crushed.
Well, you know,
and how does a guy like that go into a store and buy a new hockey mask?
Okay.
I mean, what do you think he looks like underneath the mask?
Man, I don't even know where to begin with Ebert's statement. I'm not going to claim he never even bothered to watch these movies, but it's evidently clear while he wasn't paying any kind of attention.
Let's go skinny dipping.
Ironically, although Part 5 is called The New Beginning, it's actually the last chapter of the series' first era, a time period I like to think of as the Golden Age. From Part 6 onward, the Friday the 13th series goes in a radically different direction, creatively, tonally, even technically. We'll call Part 6 onward the Silver Age, so stay tuned, because it's coming up next time. Ugh. Hate doing that coming up next time shit.
Shenanigans. It's been a lot of fun, shenanigans. But now we've got to run. It's funny how the minutes seem to fly.